All right, 3-point lighting. This is 3-point lighting is the starting point for almost all cinematic lighting. It is the bread and butters of what we're working with. Now, take a look at this image. This is an image of a woman that only has one light pointed straight at her face. Now, you can say, hey, yeah, it's a picture. You see her, she's there. But I wouldn't say this is a very interesting picture, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Now, this is the exact same woman using the 3-point setup. Here, back and forth. Flat light, one source, using 3 light sources. What differences do you see here between these two? Number one is that the first image, this one, she looks a lot flatter, doesn't she? Her face looks wider, almost fat, very unflattering. While in this image, she has a lot more shape going onto her face. She looks slimmer. She looks better. And she comes across the screen much better, doesn't she? The picture number one, this looks a lot like a photo you would take at the DMV getting you for your driver's license. While this one looks more like something you'd hang up in your living room. It's all about the lighting. So, other part about this, other differences. Picture number one, going back to the DMV type thing, it also looks very flat, doesn't it? If you look at it, she looks, especially like right around here, around her hair, she looks like she is flat, right up against that wall, and just doesn't look very real. While image number two over here, she seems almost to be coming off the screen and is just look much more elegant in its presentation. She also looks much slimmer, as I said, and through more three-dimensional. I'm going through the PowerPoint says a lot of what I'm saying here. But in short, the first image looks like a mugshot or DMV or whatever, while the second one looks more like a glamour shot, something that looks much more beautiful. So, how does the 3-point setup work? Well, I think first off, you get part of the idea in the name is that if it's called a 3-point setup, boom, you're probably going to have 3 lights. This is roughly what you can look at for a 3-point setup. 3-point setup with its 3 light sources are made up of the key, which in this case is over here. Although the key could be on either side. You have a key light, a backlight, which is always going to be opposite the key. We'll talk about that in a second. And a fill light. And we're going to talk a lot about what each of these are about. But the backlight is going to be less intense than the key light. The key light will always be your key light, which is this one, will always be your most intense light. And then your fill light will be less than your key. Your backlight, depending, sometimes is as strong as your key, other times is weaker than your key. But we'll talk about where each of them go. Now, this clock that I'm showing here, this really is just a generic, because you could place your key light where your fill light is, and then put your fill light where your key light is. The biggest thing is that your backlight is always going to be opposite your key light. All right? Your backlight is always going to be opposite your key light. So, as I said before, you have a key light, which is the most important, prominent, brightest light in the scene. You have your fill light and your backlight. 3 things you must always remember. If there are 3 things in my camera classes that I teach, my lighting classes that I teach, the 3 things I will always ask a student is where's your key, where's your backlight, and we'll talk about do you need a fill. All right, the key light, as I said, the key light, key, is the most dominant light source in a scene. The angle that it lights the subject from sets the overall mood of the image. Now we'll talk about camera angle in another lecture, about how where you place your key can affect your image. In this case, different than our clock, the one that we had in the previous slide, our key light is someplace over here. Here's our key light. it's shining light on that side of her face. So our key light is somewhere on that side. Our fill light. Our fill light goes at a complementary angle to the key. Its job is to even out any unwanted or overly harsh shadows created by the key light. So if our key light is making one side of the face just way too dark, going back to the previous lecture we we're talking about where our bright light source is creating, our object is closest to the light source can be our brightest, and then it creates fall off and shadow going farther away we get to the light source. Well, if it's too much fall off, too much shadow, use your fill. In this case, our fill light would be over here somewhere, shining a little bit of light over on the side of her face. Just a little bit. The fill light will never be as close or as strong as the key light. Then lastly, of the 3-point setup is our backlight. The backlight always goes behind the subject at an opposite angle to the key light. Its job, and this is the most important thing about here, is to build separation from the background. So our backlight is behind the subject over here somewhere, but its job, if you look here, it's creating a kind of a rim around her hairline there. And we got a little bit of separation on her shoulder there as well. In this case, what you're doing with the key light is the same concept of contrast we were talking about before. If you look at over here, we have a bright spot on her shoulder. Bright spot on her shoulder that rolls off to more of a shadow going towards the front. It's the same concept. We also have the bright spot up here on her hair, and we have a little bit of an edge over here. It's the same concept we were talking about in the previous lecture about building contrast. We are showing that there is a light source behind her. So we see there's a light source behind her hitting here. And we get that roll off of the shadow. By having shape coming from this direction and shape coming from this direction, it makes her pop off the screen. It makes her seem three-dimensional. It also definitely shows that there is a distance between her and the wall. You put all three of them together and you have your well-lit image. You have your key light, which is over here, shining light. You have a fill light, which I'm going to make a little bit smaller over here, filling in those shadows, and then your backlight over here someplace that is just adding some separation onto her. You have them all there and you get a well composed image. Always look to where do we want to put our key, where do we want to put our key, where do we want to put our key. And then our backlight and our fill light. Warning, this is where I'm talking about the 3 lights. The one light that most people will sacrifice first, because it can be difficult to sometimes to get it in behind the subject, is the backlight. But it is so important to have that backlight in there. It is actually what I consider a beginner lighter's problem, because they think it's not important. Oh, I can see them, they look okay, the shadows are nice on the face, but you don't have that separation. You don't have what keeps them, making them look like they're popping off that screen. Backlight, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most important lights in a scene. Yeah, without your image, this is what you get. We're back to, now we have a key light here, and we have our fill light here, but no backlight. So she just looks very blah, very flat. It looks like she's right up against that wall and just really does not pop off that screen. Compare the two. Backlight in image 1, no backlight in image 2. You decide. So this 3-point setup, if you end up deciding to go into cinematography, you'll be dealing and working with those lights your entire career. And it's so important to have a strong, firm understanding of what a basic 3-point setup is. As I said, there are times that maybe you don't need the fill. Maybe you want those rich shadows happening on the face. If you really want to have her face much more dark, maybe you don't want to have a fill. But the backlight and the key light are so important. So that's their 3-point setup. Thank you.